Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising as we begin a 5-day program on science and consciousness. As we begin today, I just want to note very quickly that this is the anniversary of the birthday of Martin Luther King Jr., that great humanitarian and Nobel Peace Prize winner who did so much in his lifetime, and through his death in 1968 to inspire not only the United States, but the entire world with the power of nonviolent resistance to injustice and the capacity of human beings to dedicate themselves over time to eliminating the scourge of slavery and racial discrimination. As we begin our program today, I just want to note the context within which we're convening this program on science and consciousness. As all of you know who've been following Humanity Rising or following just events in the world, the U.S. government is now in a process mandated by law, passed last December and signed by President Joe Biden on December 22nd, to begin the process of turning over to the National Archive of the Library of Congress all the information that has been retrieved by government agencies, the military, contracting corporations, about the UFO phenomenon since the end of the Second World War nearly 80 years ago, 78 years ago, now called unidentified anomalous phenomena. This is an extraordinary milestone in the history of humanity, our species, as for the first time, collectively and incontrovertibly, we're being provided evidence that we are not alone and that extraterrestrials have been on planet Earth, and that there's evidence that will be forthcoming, much of which already exists in the public domain, that alien spacecraft have been retrieved, alien bodies have been retrieved. There's a whole plethora of evidence around contact and communication. As we begin this ET moment for humanity, which is going to change fundamentally both human identity and relationship, not only now with the rest of nature, but with the cosmos itself, as we come into an awareness and sustained contact with alien beings far, far in advance of everything that we have achieved here on planet Earth. There are two aspects that are going to now become paramount for human learning and human concern. Number one, what are the facts concerning extraterrestrial evidence? And number two, what do we know about extraterrestrials, and how can we begin to establish contact and communication with them? This is a domain that has been the most closely held secret, possibly in history, not only by the US government, but by the Russian and Chinese and other governments around the world that have experienced unidentified flying objects in their airspace and have recovered the evidence and kept it absolutely secret. And now that secret information is coming into the public domain. So for the first time, the area of science and consciousness is going to become front and center as the new frontier of human intellectual history and endeavor as we grapple with this extraordinary development in human awareness. And so last week, we began with the history, with the preeminent historian of UFOs, Richard Dolan, who is now working with Daniel Sheehan and others to compile the essential 100 facts that we can take as given about this phenomenon. And this week, we're going to be focusing on the science of consciousness, because in the final analysis, we need to get to know these beings. And the only way to do so is to refine our consciousness so that we can become more aware and we can engage in meaningful, intelligible communication with these beings. So science and consciousness, along with the history of this phenomenon, are at the heart of what humanity now needs to take in. And as you all have been told, the New Paradigm Institute in Washington and Ubiquity University are developing the first ever extraterrestrial studies program, which will bring these aspects into your attention through certificates, which will lead to master's degrees, Ph.D. degrees, and eventually bachelor degrees in extraterrestrial studies. This is unprecedented and very, very exciting as the new frontier of human awareness. So thank you, everyone, for joining us. And now I would like to introduce my good friend and colleague, Peter Merry, the managing director and chief executive of Ubiquity University, who also works in science and consciousness through Broughton Hall and a variety of institutions and companies that are being set up in this domain, who is the convener of this 5-day program and will introduce our speakers today and every day for this week. So Peter, thank you so much, and I turn the program over to you.
Great, thank you, Jim. Yeah, it's a very interesting moment, because we started doing science and consciousness annual events about 3 years ago, when through a number of synchronicities, we inherited the equipment and the whole library and resource papers and everything from the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab at Broughton Sanctuary in Yorkshire. And on the back of that, we started organizing these events around trying to integrate the science and consciousness. We've been doing them for 3 years, exploring kind of related topics. This year, we were looking at time, and particularly the nonlinear aspects of time, fascinating, with academics doing, research that just challenges the foundations of many of our assumptions on the nature of reality. And then as this UAP disclosure issue started coming on, and I was having more conversations with Jim and looking into it more myself, and it's seeming to be that people were concluding that, firstly, the communication with these beings seems to happen telepathically, and secondly, that the technologies that they found don't seem to be from a kind of industrial civilization such as ours, but somehow related to intention and consciousness. And so all of a sudden, here were these two things coming together: the work that we've been doing exploring science and consciousness, and the fact that people are starting to realize that and having to accept the fact that there are extraterrestrial beings. They have been here for a while. They do have technologies that certainly our fighter pilots say we can't compete with, and communicate in completely different ways than we're used to communicating with. Not that we can communicate, because, as many of you know, if you've practiced, we can actually communicate telepathically and do have those capacities. And we're going to have to learn how to do that again, or for the first time. The key around this, though, particularly for the Western mind as well, is to make sure it's properly grounded in the science and the research around it, because there's so much kind of noise out there around this whole topic, that it's important to help people distinguish, what is real evidence that's out there, and what are just kind of theories and speculations. And so integrating the best of the scientific approach with the experiential consciousness work is absolutely key, to be able to get this out into the mainstream in such a way that people don't feel threatened by it as much as is possible, and take it seriously. As many of you know, we host the Princeton equipment now at what we call Wyrd Experience, WYRD, because before Wyrd was corrupted to mean strange, it actually meant the interconnected web of all things that generates all life, and was spelt with a Y, WYRD. So one of the slogans we use now is making Wyrd the norm. And this is what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to help people remember that the invisible dimensions in the subtle energy fields, or the information domains, or however we want to frame it, are a very important part of our reality that our narrow materialistic mindset has excluded, because we can't see it, and therefore we can't measure it, and therefore it doesn't exist according to the materialist scientific paradigm. So helping people to relearn, or to learn for the first time, what is the nature of this dimension of reality, in a way that is, easy to follow, grounded in proper research, and that people can experience directly themselves, I think is going to be a really important area of work for the coming years. And so that's why we've set up this week, to be able to explore some of the aspects related to consciousness and the science of consciousness, to start us off on that path as we develop the School of Science and Consciousness at Ubiquity, the Science and Consciousness degree programs, in parallel with the Extraterrestrial Studies programs. And what a better place to start than the Princeton Engineering Anomalies Research Lab, which has done, as far as I know, and I'm sure Roger will correct me if I'm wrong, some of the most thorough work on this whole topic over a period of 28 years. I came across it first when I was reading Lynn McTaggart's book, The Field, and I got so excited when she referenced it, because it meant that I could now talk to people when I was introducing this in workshops or doing public talks about research done at the School of Engineering in Princeton, and show the evidence, and actually have devices that people can interact with their mind and intention. It completely changed my ability to be able to communicate this topic to people. So I was immensely grateful for the work that Roger, with Brenda and Bob John and many others did over the years, because it's created a foundation that enables us to engage, particularly with the Western mind, on this topic in a grounded way. Now, there will always be people who won't believe it anyway. In fact, I remember at the end of this 2 DVD set that PEAR Lab put together, summarizing their work, Professor Robert Jahn tells the story of what he says in inverted commas, scientists coming up to him and saying, "Professor Jahn, even if what you are saying is true, I wouldn't believe it." So there will always be those who have, how much evidence, whatever we provide, they won't. But there are also those, I think, who are open-minded enough, but also have a discerning mind to, if they see the evidence from a scientific perspective and are then able to engage experientially, are likely to open up to the possibility and start to explore this dimension more. So very happy to have with us Roger Nelson, who was part of the original team working at the PEAR Lab, and Jeff Dunne, who now runs the International Consciousness Research Lab, ICRL. That kind of was what PEAR set up to continue the work afterwards. Jeff, of course, also the son of Brenda Dunne, who was the psychologist at the lab, and Jeff has heard from himself anyway, spent many nights on that great 1970s orange couch that was at the lab, and that is now in Yorkshire, of all places, sitting opposite the famous Murphy, the random mechanical cascade, which has all these balls dropping down it and people influencing which way they fall. So great to have you two with us. Thanks for joining us. And thought what we're going to do is just tell a little bit of the story, really, of the PEAR Lab to set that foundation. And Jeff has got some lovely pictures, and Roger will come in as we go through the initial presentation to describe some of the experiments they did and work, and then after that, as usual, we'll move into a dialogue and also move into look at what has that work led to now, be it the work we're doing at Wyrd Experience or with Wyrd Technologies, on that Roger is doing with the Global Consciousness Project, now together with Heart Math Institute. So an exciting hour and a quarter we have ahead. So welcome, gentlemen. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Peter. Yeah.
Thank you, Peter.
We thought it would be kind of nice to have a little bit of a walkthrough to get a sense of what the laboratory was like. And this is more than just history, if you will. One of the interesting challenges that PEAR faced was this sort of unending onslaught of people with a mindset like Peter described the other person. Well, I wouldn't believe it even if it was true. And so as with any scientific program, you want repeatability and so forth. And people would try to run similar experiments and yet not understand the true essence of what was happening there was not simply a matter of setting up a machine, hitting a button the same way, but there was a spirit or sort of a greater piece to the overall program that could not be captured simply by saying, I'm going to put a bunch of machines in a room and see if they're the same way. There was a human aspect to it because what was being studied was fundamentally the beginnings of a science of the subjective, right? The subjective piece of this is critical to any of this. And just as a moment to tie it back to what Jim said, the idea that we need to get our arms around, our mental arms around consciousness is clear, but it's also a little bit scary in the sense that you could find people saying, well, I just need to study the brain. And that's very much like people trying to understand how we can make plants grow by pouring water on concrete. Well, I know when it rains, the concrete gets wet, and a few days later, the plants seem to be blooming. So I'm just going to keep pouring more and more water on concrete until the plants bloom. It's like you missed the point, right? What's going on is at a different level, and it's the same kind of thing that happens here. If you think that what you're doing is just the machines, you've missed it. And so the pictures that I want to show you here, hopefully what you'll get out of this is, yeah, there's interesting equipment there, but there's also the spirit of what the PEAR Lab was, what it felt like, the experience that it gave to the people who were there. So let me share my screen here. Let me share the right screen here. And hopefully you will see, there we go. If you went into the PEAR Lab, you did so typically through kind of a maze of the engineering quadrangle building, down a set of stairs into the basement, into sort of this innocuous place, and you came across a door that kind of looked like this. It used to actually have a little psi symbol, the Greek letter psi, which eventually people kept responding to and thinking, why do you have a devil's pitchfork on your door? Which is sort of a funny thing for an engineering program not to recognize a Greek letter, but be that as it may. So took that down and just said something that was a little bit more obvious. And when you open that door, what you would see is something that looked like this, that famous big orange comfy couch that indeed I spent many a nap time sitting on. And you'll notice some of the important things. Lots of really interesting pictures, an array of stuffed animals here. There's a human element to all of this. The machine that you see on the right is Murphy, that Peter mentioned briefly, and that is sort of the cornerstone of what you'll experience if you go up to the Wyrd Experience in Yorkshire and walk into the space. That you can't help but Murphy's right there. It's beautifully iconic. And you notice in the background that person sitting in the office over there, that's the same person as you see sitting in the picture here. Bob and Brenda really were the mother and father of this event. Percy, the dog, perhaps the most important of the children. I think he did, I'm here, but Percy was like, yeah, come on. No. And so if you look at Murphy here, what you see is a machine in which about 9,000 balls would drop through a series of pegs, and they would form this Gaussian distribution. And the goal would be that you would sit in front of that machine and you would try to influence it to go to the left or to the right. And then documentation would be taken. You see the camera on the wall. This is one of the rare cases where somebody was doing this without a stuffed animal literally on her lap, but I think she was posing for the picture. And a lot of discussion that happened throughout the 27 years that the program was running, where people would sit around and have conversations about this. And that was a really important part of what was going on at PEAR. Just taking a different angle on it, you see there's other rooms in the laboratory. And that little cubby that was right behind it was where a lot of writing and research was done as well. But if you turn the corner into that door that you saw in the first picture, you see a little room in here, which is where probably the majority of the REG data was taken, as well as some other experiments. You see this drum in the back, which is another way of experiencing REG experiences as well. It's an REG-driven drum, and that too you will find happily thumping away at the Wyrd Experience now.
Jeff, I think you might need to explain what REG is.
Excellent, thank you. Yes, in a world of acronyms, REG stands for Random Event Generator. It is also, if you hear the term random number generator, these are two different ways of referring to the same kind of device. What those do is they use a variety of different physical mechanisms. Most of them these days are sort of operating through quantum mechanical effects, but in theory, one could design such a machine on lots of different things. And what it does is it's essentially an electronic coin flipper. It's designed so that as you ask it for data, it will respond with a series of 1, 0, 0, 0, 1, 1, 0, 1, 1. And under normal, quote unquote, operation, it is designed so that you get as many zeros as you get ones. And then you can analyze that data and ask, am I seeing a random pattern, or is there some non-randomness to this? And the PEAR research really looked at shifting the mean away from 50-50. Can it be changed, for example, to 50.001, 49.999, as opposed to 50-50, which doesn't sound like a huge difference, especially if your goal is to walk into a casino and try to do something. But the fact is that when you've collected the sort of overwhelming amount of data that PEAR did over 3 decades, the variations to go to 50.01 is so far beyond the realm of sort of, it's just a fluke. Sure, you can get 50.01 if you collect 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, but can you get it when you start looking at, I collected 1 million or 1 billion and so forth? And that's really that device, the REG, the random event generator, was, I think, the sort of the main workhorse of the experiments that PEAR was running. And there one is. This is one of the older ones. As time went on, things got a little bit smaller. For example, the devices that you see on the left here eventually became the size of this small box that you see on the right over there. And of course, today they're considerably smaller. And in fact, if you look at the Global Consciousness Project 2, the GCP2 devices, that device, which is probably not significantly larger than the box that you're seeing here and considerably flatter, has 4 of them in it. So you can get a sense of that, right? These are on chips at this point. And hopefully I see Roger getting up, and I'm hoping that he's going to actually have one he can show us. But here's a couple of the different iterations all sitting on one table together. And in fact, this device, if you can see this sort of white box, it's a little tougher to read anything on it. That actually is sort of the size, if you go out and buy an REG today, that's probably what you would be getting for the sort of the most cost-effective or cost-affordable types of devices. And Roger has got one there that you can see. So if you turn the other way from the same picture that we saw before and you open the door to the left, you'd look into what was another area of the PEAR lab. And you see there are a variety of different experiments that were run there. The pendulum you can see in the back, and that little frog sitting on a small dome is not just a decoration. That too was an experiment, sort of referred to as the robot experiment, in which people would gather around the table and try to influence what direction that little car would go. And here you can see that same pendulum on the left, and now shifted a little bit so you can see on the right a fountain experiment in which people would try to influence the behavior of a jet of water that was coming up.
Jeff, may I interrupt?
Yeah, absolutely.
Your mother, Brenda Dunne, was a big advocate of education, so she invited classes of 10-year-olds to come and learn about science in the PEAR lab. And they got to try various experiments. And guess who does extremely well with the robot? Those kids were amazing. They could get the robot to come to them almost on command.
Yeah, it's incredible. And as you think about what the implications of that, well, why would children be better? And one hypothesis, which personally I think is on track, is that kids don't get in their way as much, get in their own way. They don't try to overthink things. They just do, right? And a couple of the experiments that were never really, I think, formally published in the Journal of Scientific Exploration, although they might have been. Roger, I'm curious if you know if they were. You take that one step further and you ask, well, if kids are good at it, what about animals? What about plants, right? They're not going to get in their way. They're not thinking the same sense. And yeah, those also, there was a fantastic experiment that was set up in which a small food dispenser device was filled with food, and raccoons had an incredibly successful run at getting that thing to spit out more food than it should have. And Veggie Reg, which looked at a similar thing with plants and was also amazingly successexual. That's right. Something that ICRL is actually this year probably going to be sort of bringing back some experiments as well. Roger, go ahead. Yeah.
Well, Brenda had a much loved plant called Eddie at her home, and she set up a random number generator to provide more light or less light, depending on how the REG, the random number generator, spat out its numbers. And again, it was a successful demonstration that the plant, which wanted more light, there's no people around at all, would get more of the positive expressions of non-randomness. It was, I don't think that ever was published, but it was one of the more informative kinds of experiments.
Yeah, yeah. I've been working with a group called the Wild Alchemy Lab in seeing if we can start up some of those again, and some exciting opportunities there. So going back to that original picture, would be remiss if I didn't zoom in a little bit on the office as well. You can tell that part of what made this all successful was Brenda's proclivity towards an extremely neat and orderly desk. But that also has, you know, some interesting applications, that there's a balance that's at play in this. If you went into, and I don't have a picture of Bob's desk, if you went into Bob's office, you would see a fairly neat and orderly desk, and not so much for Brenda. But it was, in fact, the partnership of these two and the complementarity of those personalities coming together to work in a particular way that really made this possible. And the implications of that, and I won't go into it because you could go on for hours about that, but the implications of the importance of complementarity, and recognizing the strengths of that which is different than yourself, and not trying to make everything the same, but the inclusivity, and, you know, recognizing that there is importance of covering the whole spectrum, and whatever that spectrum may be, can't be overstated. This is another room in next to the office. If you see this little door over here, just to give you the complete tour, where a lot of fantastic conversations and theoretical models were being explored on that chalkboard to the left. And then you can ask ourselves, where did this go? I mentioned that all of the equipment, or Peter mentioned that all the equipment that was there, you know, Brenda and I had, over the, say, starting 10 years ago, actually even more now, we're in 2024, would kind of like, what do we do with this? This equipment was sitting in a storage unit, and we just couldn't figure out a place. There's nothing had really congealed as a place to make this available to people. And then, just like magic, one day, out of the blue, Peter gets in touch and says, "Do you have any of the equipment from the PEAR lab? And if you do, would it be possible to get some of it?" And like, "How much do you want? How much have you got?" Like, "We've got it all." And so it was just this unbelievable gift from ICRL's perspective, to have the Wyrd Experience being set up, where all of a sudden we can get this out in a place where it's absolutely beautiful, and where people can start to experience it there, and experience it not only just in a place of beauty, but by people who are coming to it with a mindset of looking for bigger, you know, and richer understandings of the world, ourselves, and the connection of those two. And that's really to tie back to what I started at the beginning. We have to understand that understanding consciousness, if our goal is to enable us to be effective in talking with other species, whether they're from this planet or not, right? We just mentioned about, for example, plants, and there's a lot of research on plant intelligence going on right now, as well as extraterrestrial intelligence. Any of these, we need to take this from the right mindset. So just a quick walk through here. What is the Wyrd Experience? What does that look like? And if you kind of were walking up to it, it's that building that you see right in front of you. It typically is being guarded by a very friendly peacock who just wants to make sure everybody knows what they're getting into, which I just think is absolutely fantastic. And then as you walk into this sort of domed archway, which I don't know about you, Peter, but it always makes me feel like I'm just stepping into a little piece of Middle Earth. I don't know why, but it gives me that feeling. Here's a lovely picture that we took of Brenda on the right with Lynn McTaggart on the left during the sort of opening unveiling conference that we had 2 years ago, for the first Science and Consciousness experiment. And there's two other rooms that you can go into. The one that's actually, it's not that door, it's the door next to it. One is the Robert John room, where in addition to a library, alas, I don't have a good picture of the books in the library, there's a layout of sort of more recently published books and Wyrd merch. And then the other book, The Brenda Dunne Room, being pointed to by Brenda Dunne, which is delightful. And there behind, you can see Murphy. But there's Murphy on the wall in the main Brenda Dunne room of the Wyrd Experience. And if you were standing in front of Murphy and turned around and looked the other way, there is that orange couch with a new generation of people coming to experience all this and to appreciate what this implies for the future of us as a species. I think that's it. And then there's this guy, I don't know who he is. So, oh, actually, I did include that for a reason. I was trying to be flippant, but here you can see the other experiments that are there. The pendulum experiment here, the corner of Murphy, the fountain experiment here, and some of the REGs that are behind as well. So that's at least a little bit of a walkthrough tour between Princeton to Northern England.
Magic. Thank you so much, Jeff. That's great. So, Roger, what would you like to go a bit deeper into, or tell us a bit more of the stories of what it was like to actually work there and the kind of things you were doing? Yeah.
Well, it was an amazing experience all the time. Every day you would come in and there would be another, I don't know, maybe an emergency, maybe a party. It was an amazing place because it was human. And I think that, as Jeff mentioned, was one of the essential aspects of the PEAR lab. We did good science. We did the best possible science, that is the best that we could possibly manage, and it was pretty damn good. But we also did humanity. We did jokes and stories, and we did things like try to provide an environment. That big orange couch that's been mentioned so many times is part of the idea that we wanted this to be a kind of living room where people could come in and play with our machines in a rigorous experimental context, but sit comfortably on a big old orange couch, surrounded by stuffed animals of various kinds. And by the way, Bob John's office was neat. He kept it neat and had help as the dean, but it had stuffed animals too, especially giraffes. He was a person who believed in, I guess there's a giraffe society that says, we're here to symbolize the importance of sticking your neck out. So I also have a few slides I'd like to show just to go to this kind of science aspect of the PEAR lab, maybe in a little more depth. I'll try sharing my screen. For some reason that's not working. Can a technical person help?
Georg? It was working when we tried it before, wasn't it, Roger?
Yes, it was. Let me see. I can
Give me a moment here.
So
What's
Brenda,
it saying when you try, Roger?
it's still not working.
Everything's working at our end, Roger. I'm not sure what's the problem.
Are you clicking on share screen on the green button at the bottom, share screen?
I did click on that. I'll do it again.
And then it should give you some options as to what you can share.
And select the presentation, and then don't forget, because I do this all the time, don't forget to actually click share on the bottom right.
Okay.
There we
go.
There we go. There we go.
Yeah. So you'll have seen several of these machines in the picture that Jeff was showing, but this was what we call the benchmark REG. It was like this pretty big or medium-sized suitcase, much too big to think about anything like portability. And on the lower right, you can see a paper tape coming out at the very beginning in 1980. When I got there, we were printing the numbers and adding them up and so forth. And my first task was to connect this machine to the computers in the engineering school. And so that was not like today's wireless easy connections, but a bit of an undertaking. But it allowed us to go fully computer controlled and to take data over periods of time that ultimately became like 28 years. This shows the first something like 6 or 7 years of data from this benchmark random number generator machine. You can see that there are two traces, one labeled low, one labeled high, and both of them depart from the level trend that we expect from random numbers in this kind of display. You can see in the middle baseline data, which was what the machine produced when the people let it alone, let it do what it was trying to do. It turns out that those baselines were a little better than they should have been, because we are always sort of connected to our world, and when we're told this is a baseline condition, we want it to be good baselines, and so sure enough, they were. Here's another picture of the random mechanical cascade, which, as Jeff mentioned, is called Murphy. That's because if anything can go wrong, it will. That's Murphy's law. One of the challenges, and this is in the early 1980s, was to make this machine allow the balls to fall through counting, electronic counting devices, which just means a diode pair that would be interrupted by a ball falling. But it took us many, many months to get a system that would allow that to happen without any balls being miscounted or missed. And this is the frog on the robot. Was the guy that put this together. John Bradish was a sort of a mechanical genius, but an artist as well, an electrical engineer to boot. So he called this a robotic Zamboni, referring to the machine that's used to clear and smooth out ice skating rinks. Here's a picture of one of our student interns working with the linear pendulum. What he's trying to do is to increase or decrease the damping of this device that goes, this beautiful crystal ball swinging across the scene. What most people tried to do was make the air thicker or thinner somehow. And we were able to tell the difference between the distance of the swing from one swing to the next. The damping rate, it continued to swing very nicely for maybe 2 minutes, but our measurement was so precise that we could see even microseconds of difference in the length of the swing. This shows a couple of other kinds of experiments. The dual thermistor experiment, we had an interferometer, we had a Crookes tube, all kinds of things. And eventually, in the early 90s, we worked pretty hard making more compact random number generators. The one on the left here is called a Mind Song. It was actually designed in the PEAR lab, but built by a company called Mind Song. And eventually it was shifted to the Celeron company, which was part of or connected with ICRL for a number of years. And many people out in the world have Celeron devices and software to take data. On the right is another highly competent random number generator, which, as you can see, is smaller than the proverbial pack of cigarettes. Here's a use, an application of those small random number generators. We attached them to pocket-sized computers, and we could take them out into the world and look at what we were thinking of as group consciousness. What we predicted was that if the group became coherent for some reason, maybe they were doing a ritual, maybe they were all enthralled by the same concert. In any case, if they resonated with each other, became coherent as a group, we predicted there would be deviations in the random data. On the left in this picture, there's a small group walking around the base of the Devil's Tower, which is the remains of a volcano. That's the lava that was welling up. The rest of the mountain had eroded away over the millions of years. And it's a sacred place for American Indians. And we went there with a shaman from the Shoshone tribe, and he did a healing ritual at a place he picked out as what he referred to as the power spot. And again, the expectation for data like this is it should be level. It's not level. It's not even close. And when I had been talking to the shaman about what we were doing, and when I showed him this figure, he said, "Now I understand what you mean." And on the right is data from an excursion into the Great Pyramid in the Giza Plateau in Egypt. We were a group of 19, you might call us seekers, people who are interested in the ancient religions. So we were doing chanting and meditations in various places. So this graph shows the entry, nothing much going on. It's a level kind of a random trace. And then in the Queen's Chamber, we started chanting and meditating. And in the King's Chamber, we did 2 long meditations. But I won't go on, but what you can see is that the data are not going in a level trend, anything but. And these are the kinds of things that led us to think that we really could capture some evidence of group consciousness. When people are together, when people join together intentionally, and sometimes automatically and accidentally, we changed the world very slightly in the form of these random number generators. And these experiments led to a lot of questions, including things like, what if we did multiple random number generators? And what if the group was really big? This was one of the prototypes. When Princess Diana was killed, we didn't have a bunch of, or any random number generator generating data. But during the funeral, I asked all my colleagues and friends to please take data and send it to me. And so I got a bunch of data of various forms, normalized it all. And when it combined, it produced the red trace, which is about 100-to-1 odds against chance that we would get so much deviation. That gave us courage to go ahead and build a global network. This shows where we did have, over the years, what we called eggs at that time. That's the acronym for electrogaiagram. It's analogous to an EEG, but gave us a very nice pronounceable word, egg, for the devices that we put out in the world. I'm going to show you just a few examples. Many of you will not even remember the Yugoslavian bombing in Kosovo. And you also probably won't remember the Buddhas of Bamiyan, which were blown up by the Taliban. And probably almost all of us do or will remember something about 9/11. We had at that time 37 random number generators in a network around the world, and this is what the data looked like. before, during, after. It basically shows a tremendous change in the trend, starting a little bit before the actual attacks and continuing for 2 days. Basically, it is an unassailable indication that we have captured something like the fear and anger and maybe compassion of a group consciousness comprising most of the people in the world. Just another picture of the same data, which shows more sharply what's happening over the period of time that we think of as 9/11. We didn't look just at tragedies or devastating situations, but also Peace Day marches and that sort of thing. Here's a picture of New Year's that most people will say is a positive sort of occasion. So we're looking to see whether there might be some change in the data due to a very, very large number of people doing what in an objective sense is not particularly thrilling or noticeable, but in a subjective sense is extremely important. People come together to celebrate New Year's all over the world, even in places where there are different dates for New Year's. This is a combination of, I believe, 7 years worth of data where we were predicting that when people come together, the variability of the data would change and become less fragmented and less upset or less random. And sure enough, it does start a few minutes, something like 5 minutes before midnight, dropping off as we predict. And then after bottoming out right around midnight, it comes back up to the normal trend again. So this is a picture of the data from the formal experiment, which ran until late 2015. We decided that we would do 500 tests of this same question. Does a gathering of human consciousness correlate with changes in the data? This trace shows the accumulated deviation over the 500 trials. Each one is the average size of the deviation is not terribly impressive. It's 1/3 of the standard deviation. But because we persist and because we're patient and do many replications, we wind up with a very persuasive picture of human consciousness changing the physical world. And this has a probability against chance of something like 3 in a trillion. Very unlikely, you might say even impossible to get something like that by chance. For some reason, my slides are not advancing, but that's basically most of the story. This bottom line, which is pretty impressive, allowed us to do deeper kinds of analysis, and we're able to discover such things as what kind of emotions are important. And because it turns out that most of what seems to be driving the changes is emotion. And it turns out, to my pleasure and that of other people as well, that one of the most powerful emotions is compassion. If we look at an event that embodies or expresses compassion or love, those connecting kinds of emotions, then we see bigger effects in the data. The more compassion, the more powerful the effects. There are lots of other kind of things that I could talk about, but we're running low on time. And I'd like to just sort of wind up saying that the essence of the findings in this global consciousness project are very much in line with the kinds of things we found earlier. And some of the things that Jim was talking about and Peter, we're connected. We human beings are connected with each other in ways that we don't understand very well yet. It's something that we need to put our hearts and minds to studying, because not only would we like to communicate with wise figures or intelligences from other domains, we would like to get our own act together and work toward the potential that we have as individual human beings. We are amazing in potential, and we're kind of barely scratching at the edges of learning how to really live up to our possibilities. So thank you. I'm going to end the share if I can figure out how to do that.
Great. Yeah. Thanks, Roger, for adding that layer of depth. Fantastic. I'd just like to come back maybe for both of you, but one of the questions that somebody asked in the chat was about this issue of reproducibility and the challenges that some people have had reproducing the results that you created at the PEAR Lab. And so maybe a little bit about that. And Jeff, if you want to speak also about this question of the subjective role in that.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know who wants to go first. But...
Well, I'll tell the one story that I know, because Roger's, so I'll get the one in case, because if Roger tells that story, I may not have it.
Go ahead.
One of the things that I think was really fascinating about the efforts for reproducibility in this, and I have a few stories, but not as many as Roger would, is whether or not people recognized what was going on. It was in many ways actually very much like people trying to make plants grow by watering pavement. Don't recognize what it is that you're doing. So, for example, one of my mother's favorite stories was about a laboratory who said, "Hey, we've set up your experiments, we've brought people in, and there's no results. This just doesn't happen." Bob and Brenda went and visited them and said, "Well, can we look at this?" They went, and what they discovered was that the protocol that they had was that they would bring people in, they'd sit down, and they'd start them off with, "Well, you know, some people think that you're able to affect a machine just by thinking about it. But let's give it a try anyway." Right? And not surprisingly, no results. Well, why not? Well, because they missed half of the picture, right? They eliminated the fact that your mindset plays an important role in this. Right? It is not enough to have an intention. You have to have the open-mindedness to recognize that you could actually make a difference. And if you go in with the assumption that it can't work, through not recognizing the importance of the subjective aspect, it doesn't work for you. You have to be open to the whole picture. Otherwise, you're literally just going to continue to pour cans of water on the pavement and ask why you can't see the plants growing. Well, because it's not about watering pavement, it's about rain. And watering pavement is only one consequence of rain. There are others. And if you don't recognize the bigger picture, you're not going to see the results. And I think that's what really happens in most cases. If you start your whole premise, as many people do, with how can we figure out how the brain generates consciousness? Well, if it's not the brain that generates consciousness, you've immediately sort of lost the ability of that scientific investigation to understand what's going on. And I think that happens a lot. So anyway, sorry. Thanks for letting me share that.
That's a good story, but it's a sad story because so many people who try to do this kind of research don't recognize the importance of acceptance. We have to accept what the world presents to us in order for it to be anything like a present. I like to think that there are several contributing factors. One of them is to whether or what kind of results we get. One of them is the sort of nominal experimental aspect. A person is trying by intention to change the behavior of a random number generator. So we got that person and his or her intention, right? But we also have an experimenter, and there is a question that's being asked. And what's the form of that question? It had better be one that is that provides the possibility of the acceptance, the subjective aspect, as Jeff mentioned, and then the nature of the question, as in most people know in physics and quantum studies, especially, the type of question you ask, the way you ask the question is going to influence the results you get. And Jeff's story definitely alludes to that. You say, we want you to do something impossible. And we've got a machine that will measure how it works. That's deadly to consciousness research. I think basically the simple way to think of it is you have to be conscious. You have to open up and be fully conscious in order to do this kind of work. In order to answer a question about consciousness, you have to be conscious.
Well, it sounds like it really is requiring a kind of different approach to science, right? Because traditionally science has tried to exclude the observer or the role of the subjective, even though quantum science has been telling us for decades now that the observer influenced the observed. We still seem to be living in this materialistic mindset that there is actually an objective reality. But what you're saying is now you actually have to integrate the subjective into the research. And this is why we get all these reproducibility issues, because they just don't get that piece of it, right?
Right, but the truth it also includes the fact that there are a lot of replications that are successful. Yeah. There's way more of those than there are of the unsuccessful replications. And another thing that I think happens is people look at our graphs and they see this, big incline, so they expect to see that each time they try, and they don't understand that what we're actually looking at is the accumulation of a lot of experience, a lot of time of people sitting in front of the machine. I want to mention that one of Bob John's sort of anecdotal stories was that I'm not sure whether somebody came to him and said he should do this, but the idea was that we should be able to open the lab door, push a button, and have all the experiments run. Bob just laughed because he knew, because he was actually working with the real stuff and with Brenda, that there's more to it than just pushing the button.
Yeah. Well, as you say, we've got half an hour we could take max. I know what I'd love to do is move on to a question around implications. So, 28 years of very, very thorough research, 1 in a billion chance, nearly, that what you found was chance, published in all the journals, blah, blah, blah. As far as I'm concerned, we're beyond the question of, whether it's proven something or not. Let's just get beyond that, right? Clearly intention combined with attention, which is important, mind and heart together, influence what would otherwise be random events without any physical connection between the person and the device, and, as you found, outside of linear time and space as well. So if we kind of accept that as it were, rather than go into, accept the science, then what were your conclusions? I mean, Roger, maybe to start with, and then, Jeff, about the nature of reality, basically. I mean, this fundamentally kind of influence your results, fundamentally influence how you see the world, surely. So what are the conclusions you've drawn about the nature of reality, the nature of consciousness, and, to bring back Jim's theme of the UAPs, maybe there are other species out there for whom that is just quite normal. So how might they be experiencing reality, including the piece that we've excluded for the last couple of hundred years?
Well, one of the things that I think is essential for people to really properly understand this kind of experimentation is to participate in it. And I want to mention that PEAR not only did these mind over matter or mind-machine interface experiments, But we also had a big program of what we call remote perception or precognitive remote perception. And what that amounted to is having, in our paradigm, two people, one maybe, traveling the world, and the other one sitting in the lab. And one was the one traveling in the world we called an agent, because he or she would pick a spot arbitrarily at a time provided to both the two participants as a time when the target would be visited. Okay, and then the recipient was supposed to describe this target. And it turns out this is an experiment that you can fairly easily set up to do yourself, although it requires some fair amount of attention to detail, but it doesn't speak of, maybe a calculator later. But I can tell you that I described a target that had, let me just put it in a simple way. I described a target that was basically a huge gymnasium complex at Princeton University. And it turned out that that was the place my agent was visiting. So my experience of seeing in some amazing ethereal way, hard to understand, of seeing what this other person was also seeing, but in reality, in direct contact with the building. Anyway, that kind of experience is very, very helpful for people to get on with the implications.
What's your, I mean, Roger, just push you a little bit here. What's your understanding now of,
my understanding
of the nature of reality and consciousness? I mean, how do you make sense of it? What's the story you have for yourself?
Well, it's fairly localized in a way, and by that I'm referring to the feeling and perception and understanding I have that mind is not local. It's not stuck inside my skin, but it extends out into the world. And that's true for you, Peter, and Jeff, and everybody else in the world, really. We are all a source of a kind of consciousness field, each of us. And most of the time that the consciousness field doesn't necessarily interact mine with yours, but if we're in tune, if we're resonant with each other, if we're in a group where there's a kind of coherence for whatever reason, then our mental fields, our consciousness fields will interact, and they will basically change each other so that we create between the two of us, or all of us, a new entity, which is a kind of group consciousness. Or let me give the closest an example that most people, I hope everybody has. That is, you meet somebody, you gradually tune up, and you fall in love. And in the process of doing that, you experience and you create something that both of you experience as a new entity, the pair of us, the couple. That's a real phenomenon most people experience. And I think it's extremely indicative of what we really are. We can be lovers of the whole world.
Lovely. Thank you. So, Jeff, what did you think of everything your mum was up to? And did you think she was nuts, or did you? And where have you ended up with your understanding of how it all fits together?
Yeah, the question of what are the implications of this? There are so many implications of this. It's almost the challenge is picking a couple to talk to. There's no doubt in my mind that what's going on is that this is real, right? And that it's much more fundamental and true to the underlying nature of what we are than any of the models that we've developed in sort of the traditional mainstream scientific regime. The fact is that to stick with that mainstream mindset, you have to ignore a tremendous amount of data, a tremendous amount of experiences in order to limit yourself to that particular way of viewing the world. There's an objective reality out there that's constructed of electrons and protons, and we blah, 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 right? Follow that through. The most profound implications of this are that the experiences that we have are as much coming out of the way that we describe our experiences to ourselves and to others. That consciousness, the role of that consciousness in forming reality is playing a real part, right? It's not just an illusion. It's not a way of thinking about it. Your intentions have an effect beyond you. So it's not enough, for example, and this is one of the sort of key implications of this, it's not enough to sit in your head and go, well, I feel one way, and then turn around and say something different to the external world and think that that's the end of the story. What you do in your heart, what you do inside your mind has an effect. It has an effect on the world around you, and it changes things, sometimes in small ways and sometimes in big ways. And if you don't believe that big ways are possible, then remember the concept of the butterfly effect, which is all you really need is to affect things in a small way to propagate into major changes. And I think that that's a huge implication of this. Some of the other pieces of it that fold into it, the fact that these effects, the ability to, for example, affect an REG or a random mechanical cascade or whatever, you don't have to touch it. You don't have to be sitting in the same room. You don't even have to be in the same country. Right? Space has nothing to do with it, and time has nothing to do with it, right? Those are constructs. It's very nice, to be honest, when you think about this, to realize that quantum mechanics is going the same way, and that with all the talk about entanglement and the nature of how you interpret what are quantum mechanical operators versus what is a wave function, it's the same stuff. Time and space, these are organizing constructs. They are not fundamental principles. And that has tremendous implications. And if you take all that, and I'm going to skip 3 or 4 different steps in this because I don't want to take forever to say it, if you follow the logic of what that means, you inescapably come to the conclusion that we are interconnected beings. And in fact, said a little bit more strongly, there is one large interconnected being of which we're only part, right? It's sort of like the stomach bacteria going, aha, I'm alone and it's only me. Like, no, you have to be part of the whole system. You can't survive being an independent bacteria with no rest of the stomach to be part of, right? We all are part of the same larger ecosystem. We are inherently interconnected. Our fates are tied together. And I think that's an incredibly profound conclusion that is really inescapable when you look at the data. Like I said, I've skipped a few steps in it for the sake of time, but it means that we really are we're connected. And I'll push Roger's book, as the title of Roger's book says, connected.
Yeah.
We're connected. We're part of each other, and we have to take a little bit of responsibility as a result of that to say, if we don't take it seriously, we may be the problem as to why the world is going the way that it is, which isn't too much of a stretch either. But also that we maybe can make a difference at turning it around.
Right. We really hope so. It's like it's time to, come up to the plate and go to bat. We have we have so much difficulty talking to people on the other side of the fence. We have to learn that we are connected to them, and then somehow figure out how to get them to believe in the connection that we're all sharing. I like what Jeff says. We are part of a giant organism, and we don't really quite realize that, and we haven't yet figured out how to best take advantage of the fact that we belong to each other and to this giant The ancients in every culture, I mean, the sages and wise ones in every culture, and this is from forever, have said that we are connected. We're all one.
Yeah, I think that was the kind of conclusion that I drew after seeing all of this, and why I put so much energy into getting the whole Wyrd thing together, is because it feels like the main reason we've made such a mess of things is we've forgotten the nature of our interconnectedness.
Yeah, I'll
And
just have to.
if we can help the Western mind to kind of
Too confining.
Jim, can you mute? There we go.
Oh, yeah.
If we can help like the Western mind with some science, as it were, and some evidence of that interconnectedness, then it might just allow our rational mind to kind of open up to the possibility that there is this other dimension of reality, or as Jeff says, of which we're all embedded in this deep interconnectedness. And I think once you really deeply take that in, it has radical implications for your lifestyle choices. Why would we ever do anything that would harm something else if we really felt we were part of the same thing as that other thing around us, as it were? I mean, to put it in very thingy language. And so, being able to both provide the experiences, I think, is where I've landed on, like you were saying, Roger, actually having that experience. So when it's science and consciousness, we do the remote perception experiment, and we do it outside of time. So people realize they picked something up from their partner, but they picked it up half an hour before their partner even decided what they were going to send.
Yes.
Those experiences really change people's perception. And so developing further, like you talked about Celeron, further these devices with weird technologies that will hopefully give people those experiences, and force them to ask these questions about, well, what is this telling me about the nature of reality and things? That's kind of part of the way forward. So I can easily imagine that there could be species on other planets who kind of inhabit maybe even a bit more of that dimension than the material dimension. And they're kind of interested, and then they're kind of probably very, very surprised that these human beings seem to have actually forgotten about that piece of it, and are curious about what happens when you really go completely into the material and actually forget about the rest of it. So
somebody had asked, I saw a question float by in the chat a while ago, did you believe all this as a child growing up in this? And the easy answer is yeah, I did. But the question actually has a real depth to it, because it points to the other issue that we really face in all of this, and that is, as Peter was describing, we give experiences to people that fly in the face. You have to respect the fact that changing your mind and what you've believed over the course of however long your life has been, 10 years, 70 years, whatever it is a major investment. You've lived with your world model for many decades, and facing a new experience that cannot be described or explained in the context of that model is terrifying for many people. And the best thing that we can do is, like in my particular case, I was very fortunate. I grew up in a world that didn't tell me all of this was impossible before I saw it, right? But most people have been told that. This can't be, this isn't, even their experiences, right? I had the sense that somebody was looking at me. I turned around, somebody was looking at me. And their parents tell you, no, that's just your imagination. No, it's not, right? I mean, how many people have to experience this before you go, no, it's a real thing, right? And at some point you recognize that the amount of unlearning that's required in this can be terrifying. And just to be supportive of people as they go through this, and to be able to tell them, no, it's real and it's okay, right? There's a future there that doesn't require you to abandon your whole belief system, only to evolve it into something that's broader. And that's really what we're trying to do.
Yeah, you remind me of the fear that some people express that if they believe the data from these kinds of experiments, then they have to give up on science altogether, or they have to completely throw away physics or something. But that's not so. But what is required is an expansion, not an expulsion, an expansion. And I think we're capable of that. We just have to figure out, we have to write educational musical comedies, I think, because music is a language everybody understands. Laughter and humor are extremely important to us in communication. So if we put together educational musical comedies, and I suspect that's what Ubiquity is about pretty soon, then we can maybe re-educate ourselves in this world.
The interesting thing,
Personally
Roger, is
consider myself just to be extremely fortunate. I accidentally escaped all the conditioning that says you can't do this or that's impossible.
mm-hmm.
I don't know how. Yeah.
You know, Ubiquity, the interesting thing related to what you said is when people write their dissertation or their PhD dissertation or their master's thesis at Ubiquity, at most universities, you have to keep it strictly objective. So, Georgie Sabo, who's our Dean of Students of Graduate Studies here, who got hers from the PhD from the Sorbonne, actually on Ervin Laszlo's work, she had to, she wasn't allowed to start a sentence with I. It all had to be third person. And whereas when you come to Ubiquity, and I don't know any other university where that is, where you have to do this, you have to make the first person explicit. So what's the lens you're looking through when you're doing the research, right? What's the inner journey you go on? And like you say, it's not throwing out the literature review and the kind of third person, more objective, let's say, side of the research, but making sure that you integrate the two and see that this is one thing you're producing, how the subjective perspective influences the more objective, let's say, work that you're doing. Sometime we're going to have to get beyond this language, because I think, there is no completely objective reality, is one of the conclusions we can draw from this. So,
and that language is, in many ways, as much as it helps us, the thing that holds us back. It really is a double-edged sword.
Yeah. Jim, would you like to come back in and, you've been going deep into the UAP topic and probably been privy to much of the findings that have been that have come out there, and make any connections or ask any questions related to that?
Yes, well, thank you. Just superb presentation, Jeff and Roger. I love the combination, Jeff, of your homey, very personal pictures of the PEAR operation, because you think Princeton Engineering Research Lab, you think of something really abstract and impersonal, and it's an extraordinary thing to take in, that it was not only scientifically rigorous, but it was personally very harmonious and cooperative and fun. And Roger, that must have been an experience of a lifetime. I mean, for you too. I mean, here Jeff was taking his naps on the couch.
I stole a lot of cookies.
And you were one of the professional participants. And so I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for it, because the PEAR material is really the foundation and cornerstone of our School of Science and Consciousness, because it's so important to be rigorously grounded in science when you're dealing with the Western mind.
And somebody in the, if I can just add to that point, somebody had mentioned about how do you run experiments with REGs in the chat. And the point that you just made, Jim, right? What people have been studying this for forever, right? In their own forms. What made PEAR rather unique about this was that it really did look not at gifted individuals or unique phenomena, what have you, but that it was regular people doing these experiments and taking it in a statistical, and analyzing it, evaluating in a statistical way, as Roger pointed out. It's not about looking at one curve, one time. It's about the repeated aspects of this. And I think that's what kind of set PEAR apart, was Bob's genius in recognizing that if it was really going to make a difference and lay a scientific foundation, it had to do it by collecting huge amounts of data and showing repeatability in the results that were being obtained. And that was that cornerstone in my mind. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that. The question I'd like to start with is Peter's observation right at the beginning that the scientists are saying, even if it's true, I won't believe it, right? And I've read enough about the PEAR early history to know that there was intense opposition. There was scientific ridicule. There were attempts to shut it down. There was sustained skepticism even when the data came in. And I wanted to raise that because that's exactly what's going on with the extraterrestrial phenomenon.
Mhm.
You have the undeniability of actual retrieved alien spacecraft. You have the incontrovertible evidence of actual biologics, as they call them, extraterrestrial biological entities. And yet, the prevailing worldview is that if you even talk about UFOs or ETs, you're crazy. And so I would just love, maybe starting with you, Roger, since you were involved in it, just talk a little bit more about the process that PEAR went through of dealing with this external pressure to stop the data because it was in such contradiction against the prevailing worldview. And the fact that you folks just kept keeping on,
Yeah.
like the UFO UAP movement is doing. And now, as Richard Dolan said last week, the toothpaste is out of the tube. And
Not
there's
going to get it
nothing that
back
they can
in.
do to stop this phenomenon. But I'd love to have both of you just talk about it. And you too, Peter, since you're dealing with the same reality.
Well, first, I want to mention an ingredient of science that most people don't recognize, and that is patience. You have to be patient. You have to be willing to commit yourself to the long run and to the dedicate yourself to rigor and all of that stuff. But be sure you're having fun because it's for the long haul. But and in that vein, one of Bob John's biggest sources of, you might say, sadness or regret was that he was our fundraiser and guardian against the heathens out there. He spent far too much time. He had to countering the negativity and the literal efforts to get that lab shut down, and from within the department and within the university. He found it, I think, a lot easier to deal with outsiders, people out in the skeptical world saying, "Oh, that's all hogwash." That didn't bother him. He would just say, "Look at the data." To them, what bothered him, because he was a Princeton guy through and through, undergraduate, graduate, professor, dean of the School of Engineering. He loved that place. And there were people within that place who could not accept what he was spearheading, which is actually a look at a world that the skeptics, could not believe, even if it were true, so to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, extraordinary.
By the way, I should mention that in spite of being sort of wrapped into that work all the time, protecting the lab and protecting and funding things, he managed to make time to come and hang out with the bunch of us and talk about how things are going, what are we doing, what's next, and he was probably, I think he was the most creative of us all. I mentioned that we had a lot of trouble getting the pinball machine to do proper counting. It was Bob who came up with a solution after about a year of us all banging our heads on the wall. Yep, he was an amazing guy.
Extraordinary, extraordinary. And Jeff, you were here, you were a kid. How did you experience that patient persistence in the face of sustained skepticism?
Yeah, well, it's there's a lot of different pieces to that. On one side, as a kid, I didn't appreciate the magnitude of it until I was older. I had my own career, and I could understand, oh my goodness, if somebody had gone to that much effort to harpoon the things that I was doing, only then could I appreciate the psychological aspects of this. But even, as a kid, you hear about, well, what are those really close-minded things that are going on? And, reading about it later as well. Of course, I, got, after my mother passed away, reading some of the files that were there that I had not been familiar with. Like, what did it really take to hire a woman with credentials in psychology into an engineering lab at Princeton in the 70s? Whoa. Unbelievable. And at stages, I think there was a piece of what Bob was able to do that was just pure magic. Things that can't imagine how anybody managed to overcome some of the difficulties that he did in getting that lab stood up. But at the same time, the universe also probably said, we need this now, and was gonna contribute to that. There are a lot of times where there's funding questions like, what are we going to do now? And then at that last minute, something happened, something came to be. But it's interesting to look back on it in hindsight. And it also gives you the separation to sympathize at least a little bit with the opposition, right? And to look at this and say, okay, well, I don't agree with you, and I don't agree with the way that you handled it. I also understand that you had families to feed, and you probably viewed this as a threat, right? The person who said, I wouldn't believe in it, even if it was true, has established a reputation for one particular thing and doesn't want to see that reputation diminished, even if it's only in his own eyes in which it's diminished. That's a big psychological hurdle to overcome. And of course, when it comes to the UAPs and everything else, right? You're not just fighting against common sense or mindset or anything else. You're fighting against an economic system. You're fighting against people who want funding in one program versus another and everything else. Sure. It's a huge, multifaceted challenge in all of this that is going to have to be addressed the same way that PEAR had to address it. One battle at a time with infinite patience.
Reminds me a little bit about Ubiquity, Peter.
Yeah.
Whenever you're bringing anything new into the
that.
world, they're different issues, but it's the same dynamic. Back to Thomas Kuhn's, the structure of scientific revolutions. It's the old paradigm just can't absorb new challenging information, and yet the challenging
Breaking up a little, Jim.
It's not going to be denied. Whoops.
I think he's frozen in mine.
Oh, I'm sorry. My internet is unstable. Peter, why don't you take it and close it out?
Yeah, I'll do that. He's basically saying to take it on, his internet's coming down. Yeah, I was just gonna say, you know, there would when Jim referenced Ubiquity, I'd say there's kind of, and in this whole area, there's two things that keep me going in all of this. One is this little slogan we have, which I got from Meg Wheatley once, which is proceed until apprehended. Like whatever people say, you just keep going one step at a time until you can't. And what you tend to find is when you take a step, something changes and you're able to take the next step. So that's one. And the other is that kind of a funny thing, actually, but that marketing adoption curve, you know, of innovators, early adopters, that one. There's always an adoption curve, and there's always laggards, there's always late adopters, there's always early adopters, there's always innovators. And it's the innovators, right? And the laggards are gonna, you know, either completely ignore it or resist it or try to sabotage if it feels that it compromises their worldview and their position on things. But we just got to accept we can't convince, and we shouldn't even be trying to convince anybody. Actually, I always think it's like an invitation. It needs to be like an invitation, and trust that the innovators and early adopters, you know, when they hear about it, will come and just work with the people who come, you know, and just allow the rest to just, you know, do their thing. They might come along later as late adopters, or they might never. You know, there'll be a bunch that never will, and that kind of realization also takes a kind of pressure off the shoulders, as it were.
There was a sign that used to hang in the PEAR lab that said, Roger, I'll probably misquote it, but enjoy yourself or try to learn something, you will annoy someone. If you do not, you will annoy someone.
Yes. And
So,
I don't know if has anybody mentioned Planck's rule of advancement in science. Things change when the old ones die and the new ones take over.
yeah.
So yeah, that should encourage, you know, like old theories they're powerful, they're strong, but the adopters, as you said, Peter, they're aware of the new theory. It may not be fully fleshed out yet, but they can see it coming, and the old ones can't.
Yeah, and we just need to be there for them. That's the thing. Yeah.
So, Peter, why don't you tee us up for tomorrow, and then we'll bring this to a close.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. Yeah, tomorrow, exciting day. We've got a couple of professional remote perception people or remote viewers joining us to talk about this whole question of remote viewing and, you know, their experience of it and what it takes for people to be able to do it. So that's going to be exciting because, Jim, as you mentioned the other day, it seems like this whole topic of remote viewing has been surfacing a lot in the conversations around UAPs and things as well. So we're going to be learning a bit more about that tomorrow. So yeah, do join us for that.
Well, Jeff and Roger, thank you so much. This has been an extraordinarily scintillating session, given what's happening in the world. And you've laid the kind of foundation that we need in scientific rigor, but also the exuberance and the audacity of human curiosity, to have fun along the way, knowing, as you were saying, Roger, one way or the other, you're going to annoy somebody as the truth will out. So thank you all so much. And thank you, Peter, for bringing this all to our attention this week. So that'll bring us to a close, everyone, for our session today. You're all welcome to the after session chat. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan has just put in. And then we'll see you all tomorrow for our second of 5 sessions, this one on remote viewing. Thank you, everyone. Bye for now.
Thank you, Roger. Thanks.